Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. And today I am referencing an article by Peter St. Onge that I just recently read. And I thought it was pretty fascinating and a really, really good reminder that I wanted to share with you today. And it goes back a little bit, and anybody who has been following us or has been consuming these podcasts for a long time, you may have heard me talk about it in the context of diversification. When we go back to the history of basically how to use money, how to invest, and so forth, a really, really, really important date is the year 1971. And why I'm actually bringing it up in the context of trust is that we have seen, we meaning like anybody who is looking at the economy, anybody who is looking at money and investing and so forth, that there are movements in the world of money. Now, some of these movements are triggered by political decisions. So, for example, Russia has always been a very important component of the commodities like oil and gas and gold and silver and uranium and all kinds of things like that. And when the war with Ukraine started, the G7 Western countries all basically decided we don't want to do business with Russia anymore. We want to ban anything that is from Russia, if possible. And this was the first time, unprecedented, had never happened before, we will no longer allow Russia participate in the way money works, the way money flows, and how transactions between like a buyer and a seller on an international stage is actually happening. So that was a very, very important decision, but that also means the rest of the world now saw that this is possible, which if you had asked anybody 10 years ago, anybody in any country around the world would have said, no, this is not going to happen. We're not going to exclude somebody because there's a conflict from the international money system. Well, with Russia, it happened. And I don't want to go deep into this, but I mentioned the year 1971. And why is this 1971 and what happened a few years ago in the context of the war between Russia and Ukraine so important? In 1971, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, basically came on national TV, not just for the American public, but also for the world public, and announced that the US dollar will no longer be backed by gold. And a lot of people that aren't old enough or haven't studied it probably don't know that when you looked really closely on any dollar bill, a $1 bill, $5 bill, $20 and so forth, you could see writing on the paper actually that said you can exchange this piece of paper for gold. And the agreement that existed to make the US dollar the reserve currency after World War II was, at least in 1971, that 1 ounce of gold was worth or was calculated as worth $35. So if you had like a $5 bill, a $10 bill, and a $20 bill, you could take those three bills and go to a bank, to an official institution, and exchange it for 1 ounce of gold. So in big picture, if you think about it, any country, any individual, any company that had a lot of profits in dollars knew if something ever were to happen or if they ever didn't want to hold those dollars anymore, they could go to the US government and exchange these dollar bills, these paper bills basically, into actual gold. And that gold was stored either with the Federal Reserve or in a big vault in New York. So this announcement in 1971 by Richard Nixon to say, hey people, temporarily, as he called it at the time, we are no longer exchanging dollar bills for gold, changed the whole system, if you think about it. Now, also what's kind of interesting is 1971, we are in 2024 right now, if my math is correct, that's 30 plus 20 plus 3, right? So that's 53 years that this temporary hold of exchange dollar bills for gold is still going on. And today, when you really think about it, there are so many dollar bills in circulation that there wouldn't be enough gold in the whole world that the United States could put in any vault to have it available if anybody came along and said, okay, can you please exchange my dollar bills for gold? Now, obviously, they know that, so everybody is basically aware that this temporary change has become permanent. Now, what are the consequences and why are they arising now? As long as everybody was participating in the money system globally, even though the US dollar wasn't backed by gold, you were assured that you could always take dollars that you for some reason received because you sold something back into your own currency or into some other currency because you were participating in the global currency market and in the global exchange market. So what had happened is a lot of countries, when they bought or sold something, the common thing that they all did was using the US dollar. Right? You could convert how much is soybeans from Brazil worth in US dollars, and then when you sell that to China, you can get paid as Brazil in US dollars because you know everybody is using US dollars. Well, with the war between Russia and Ukraine and the decision by the G7 countries that they no longer accept Russian ruble and that they're basically freezing all the dollars that the Russians had anywhere in the world because they had been trading with all their commodities everywhere in the world, that woke up everybody in the world to say, oh my God, that could happen to us too. At any day, either the United States or the G7 could say, you are out of the club, you are out of the system. And the relevance of this announcement with Richard Nixon was, well, people in the past could at least say, well, I'm out of the system, but I have a piece of paper that says I can exchange it for gold. Well, now you only really have a piece of paper that is almost immediately worthless if you cannot exchange it for anything anymore. So what is the reaction to this realization? The original announcement, which didn't really trigger much, a few countries brought their gold reserves back home from New York, but other than that, nothing much happened. But now that the war basically showed that the G7 told the world, your dollars could be in jeopardy any day, any time, if we don't like what you're doing, a lot of countries in the world started to say, okay, we have to reduce the amount of dollar bills that we're having, especially the central banks. And what did they exchange them to? Even though the piece of paper doesn't say you have a right to exchange to gold, you can obviously buy gold with dollars. And that's exactly what a lot of central banks have done. And if you look, how has the gold price actually behaved since the start of the war between Ukraine and Russia, you will see that gold has gone up significantly. If I'm not mistaken, just in 2024, it went up like 20%. In 23, I think it went up 10 or 15%. So it's really gone up a lot in the last few years since the war started. And that is because a lot of countries that had a lot of dollars said, well, we don't want to carry this risk anymore. And the other thing, obviously, that is also increasing the risk is that the United States is printing so many additional dollars every year. Like, you know that there's $1 trillion of new debt every 100 days, right? So basically 3.3 billion, about a trillion of new debt just in 2024 and almost that same amount in 2023, which means there's more and more and more dollars and you cannot exchange them for anything other than using them to buy something. So a lot of countries are buying gold to not have too many dollars in their reserves. And the other thing that they're looking is for an alternative. And I don't want to start the alternative discussion here because this is already getting to be a pretty lengthy episode. But one of the alternatives that is now, since we are getting into the month of October, into the end of 2024, I'm pretty convinced the alternative for anybody who doesn't want to use the US dollar for their trading is going to be announced at the next BRICS summit at sometime in October in Russia, where the countries that are participating in the BRICS alliance, which right now I think is 11 countries, and everybody is anticipating that it's going to grow to 30 or 40 countries in the next 12 to 18 months and then continue to grow. There's affiliation with 150 countries around the world showing interest in BRICS. And their interest is obviously different, and I don't want to go too deep, but one of the reasons they have an interest is if BRICS is able to create a new modern system to purchase and sell stuff between countries that is no longer dependent on the US dollar, then this fear that the US or the G7 countries announce to any other country in the world that they don't want to play ball with them anymore, that they don't accept the dollars from them anymore, or that they are no longer willing to buy anything from them and pay with dollars anymore or accept their local currency, that risk will go away. And then the other thing why they're also obviously interested is every time you exchange one currency for another, there's a little bit of time involved, and during that time, the value between these currencies can change. So there's oftentimes a cost to exchange from like the Chinese yuan to like the Nigerian dollar or whatever it might be, and then back when you finished your transaction. So if there were a new modern currency similar to the dollar that doesn't have the threat of being shut down, a lot of countries would probably jump on that. So I promise you to make another episode whenever this BRICS summit is finished and we find out if something was announced, which I think it will be, and then also talk a little bit, what is it, when will it be available, and what might the possible impact be. But today I wanted you to be aware, why are these two dates, the 1971 announcement by Richard Nixon and this relatively recent decision by the G7 countries led by the US not to let Russia participate in the money markets, why are they so important? And so now the last point is, what should you learn from that? What should you do? Well, if the smart people in many, many, many countries around the world come to the conclusion that more and ever more dollars being printed that you cannot exchange officially for anything is not a great idea, and therefore buy gold, I go back to what I've always said about our diversified portfolio, and I recommend that whenever you can, you start buying gold coins that you can hold in your own safe or in your own little secret place, and basically start building a stack. Now you can also hold it in other ways, but I always feel something physical, something that you can touch, something that you can look at. It's similar to real estate, right? You can buy some kind of ETF that deals in real estate, but if you buy a house, it's a totally different thing. You can go and visit the place, and if you buy gold coins, you can actually take them out and take a look, and you know you actually have it. So yeah, start converting some of your dollars. And if you listen to this and your currency is euros, the same thing is true. I would strongly recommend, if you haven't started already, to convert some of your money into gold coins, because it is very likely that in the not too distant future, the dominance of the dollar is going to end, and nobody knows what happens to the value if that dominance is no longer as strong as it used to be. So I hope this gives you a little bit of a history lesson. It gives you a little bit of a, kind of positioning of why are so many countries now actually buying so much gold, which obviously leads for the gold price to go up, what you should do. And then please stay tuned. And if you're interested, you can also look in the news yourself. Sometime in the month of October 2024, there will be this next BRICS summit. And I'm pretty sure we will hear some pretty interesting announcements there. So that's it for today. Be well and stay safe, and I talk to you tomorrow.